everybody, it's me, Catieosaurus, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm taking on a topic that might be a little controversial, but I ask you, before we start, to stick around, to hear me out, to open your hearts, to open your minds, and let's have a conversation about purity culture. Have you seen a lot of videos like these popping up on your For You page lately? The ones with purity pledges, dads promising to protect their daughter's virginity, girls talking about stopping men from stumbling, saving themselves for marriage. That's called purity culture. And today I want to take an honest look at where it comes from, how it spread, and why it might still be affecting your sex life, even if you're not religious. Before we go any further, I want to be really clear about something. If you're watching this and you're a passionate Christian, someone who deeply believes in modesty, who's chosen to wait until marriage, or who values traditional family roles, you are welcome here. I am not judging you. Maybe you're a parent, a person who voted for both Obama and Trump, or someone who just thinks things are getting out of hand lately. You are welcome here too. I know that conversations about sex, gender, and religion can feel polarizing right now, but beneath all of that, I think most of us want the same things. We want safety for our families. We want to raise good kids. We want freedom to live by our values. And we want to be respected. This video isn't about calling anyone evil or saying that your faith is bad. I don't think you are bad. I went to Catholic school. I was confirmed. I grew up with a Christian-focused background and attitudes around sex and intimacy. And so I'm not interested in judging. What I'm interested in is asking how purity culture shows up and impacts our understanding of sex, intimacy, and even our own bodies. Even if you're trying to do the right thing, living by your values, what if you're part of something that's quietly doing harm? I think that's a question worth asking. Where did purity culture come from? You can actually trace it back to this guy, a man named Augustine of Hippo, a 4th century bishop who had a lot of guilt about his own philandering and sexuality, and turned that guilt into theology. He helped popularize the idea that sexual desire was a result of sin, that your body could betray your soul, and that the holiest life was one of abstinence and self-denial. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about belief. It became a tool. As Christianity spread across Europe, it became more than just a religion. It became a system. It became a business. The church controlled law, land, education, and marriage. It collected wealth through tithes, land rents, and my favorite, indulgences, which literally meant charging people money to be spiritually clean. The more people felt unworthy, the more they prayed. The more they sinned, the more they confessed. The more they confessed, the more they paid. Keeping people focused on their private morality, their lust, their shame, their unworthiness. It kept them from asking questions about injustice, poverty, or corruption. The church didn't just tell people what to believe, it told them who they were, and it made a lot of money doing it. This wasn't a charity, it was a business. And controlling sexuality, especially women's sexuality, became integral to the brand. And if that sounds harsh, think about it like this. The more you focus on purity, the less you question power. The more shame you carry, the easier you are to manipulate. The more afraid you are of your own body, the more control you'll willingly hand over to someone else to keep you safe. Sound familiar? These aren't new strategies. They're actually very old ones. We see this pattern continue through medieval Europe, the Renaissance, into the 20th century, and the Victorian ideals of the angel in the home and tying a woman's sexual status to her family's social standing. Meanwhile, men were free and even encouraged to have mistresses, while women were punished and ostracized for having sex out of wedlock. They were supposed to wait. Purity culture isn't just about waiting. It's about shame. It's about turning virginity into a measure of moral worth. It teaches that desire is dangerous and that bodies, especially women's bodies, are inherently suspect. Now, before we keep going, I want to take a second to say this. Maybe you're listening to all of this and thinking, hey, I go to church and it's not like that at all. My pastor is supportive. We talk about consent. We welcome queer folks. We talk openly and honestly about healthy relationship. That isn't what I believe. And if that's your experience, that's amazing. And I'm so happy for you. There are so many churches and faith communities today doing the work of repair, welcoming those who were once pushed out, rethinking old messages, and helping people reconnect with a sense of sacredness and community that's rooted in love, not shame. I am not here to say that all religion is bad or that being a Christian makes you the enemy. Far from it. Faith can be powerful, healing, and beautiful. But it's something that each person has to be able to choose for themselves. And for a lot of people, for a long time, the church wasn't a safe place. They were told that their identity was sinful. They deserved the abuse that they were getting, that they were dirty, broken, or less than. So when we talk about purity culture or Christian nationalism or structural harm, it's not about condemning your specific church or your specific beliefs. It's about remembering that we live in a country built on religious freedom. And that means the right to believe and the right to walk away from belief. You can love your faith, be passionate about your faith, and still ask, am I making space for people who don't share it? That's the heart of it. Belief is personal, but policy, that belongs to everyone. Why is purity culture still around today, and why is purity culture still so powerful? Because at some point, it stopped being a set of spiritual values and started being a tool for preserving power. So in the mid-20th century, America was changing fast. During World War II, a shift happened. Women were needed not just in the home, but on the home front, working in factories and administrative capacities in order to support the war effort. Then, the war ended, and tens of thousands of men were sent back home, causing turmoil and conflict as women discovered that they enjoyed being out of the home and working, but men wanted their jobs and their power back. Starting in the 1950s and ramping up through the 1980s and 90s, political and religious leaders began responding to cultural change, especially feminism, LGBTQ rights, and the civil rights movement, with fear. These movements weren't just seen as new ideas. They were framed as threats to the moral order, to the family, to America itself. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum. Women were entering the workforce. LGBTQ people were starting to ask for recognition. And for many people, especially white, church-going Americans, that felt destabilizing. So political and religious leaders responded by doubling down on something familiar: the nuclear family, morality, traditional values, and purity culture became a way to sell those ideas. But here's the hard truth. A lot of those traditions were deeply oppressive. Your mom or grandma might have grown up unable to open a bank account without a man's permission. Divorce was considered sinful, even in abusive homes. Birth control access was restricted, and sex ed was fear-based. Being gay could get you fired. Being trans was treated as a disease, a mental illness. Purity messaging wasn't just about sex. It was about social control, about keeping women financially dependent, about keeping queer people closeted, about keeping the power structure intact. And we can't forget, that structure had deep roots in the church's economic power going back centuries. From collecting tithes to owning land to shaping marriage and inheritance laws, religious institutions didn't just guide moral life, they controlled property, families, even national economy. So when leaders in the 80s and 90s started calling for family values and funneling tax dollars into abstinence programs, they were tapping into that same legacy, using sexual morality to protect social dominance. That legacy is still alive today. When schools ban sex education, when queer people are erased from public life, or when reproductive rights are stripped away in the name of morality, if you were someone who supported these movements or just wanted stability for your family, I'm not here to judge. And I want you to know that I get it. You are not alone. I grew up being taught that being gay was a sin, that same-sex marriage was going to destroy our economy. And I didn't know that I was being mistreated. I didn't know that there were different ways to talk and act around our bodies. And so I want to ask very gently, do you think that messaging really helps all people thrive? Or do they mostly help preserve a system where the same people stay in charge? Let's pause here for a second. Waiting for sex, that is a valid choice. So is dressing modestly. The issue isn't what you believe. It's how these beliefs get taught. Purity culture says that desire and pleasure, even your own body, is a dangerous thing, that your worth is based on your virginity, that desire is something to fear, that you can't trust yourself because you are inherently bad, inherently sinful. And this has real life effects on people, even after marriage. In the course of my research for this video, I got curious about what science, real peer-reviewed science, had to say about purity culture, abstinence-only education, and its effect on our minds and our bodies. And the results were frankly shocking. People who grew up in purity culture environments or with abstinence-only education often report long-term effects with shame and anxiety around sex. Even more than that, people have difficulty experiencing desire even within the context of marriage without significant guilt or shame. And they also have higher rates of things like domestic violence, sexual assaults, unintended pregnancies, and STIs. Many report feeling disconnected from their own bodies. They struggle to set boundaries or to express what they want, even in the context of healthy, consensual relationships. What I thought was interesting is that conversely, people who participated in comprehensive sex education were more likely to delay sex than those who experienced abstinence-only education. Not only were they more likely to delay sexual activity, they were also more likely to use protection, which lowers the risk of unintended pregnancies and STIs. They also report higher levels of sexual confidence, safety, and emotional well-being. They also tended to have better communication with partners and a more informed understanding of consent and boundaries. Shame doesn't create safety. Education and trust do. Now I want to talk about something that we all value: freedom. In the United States, the Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, but that also means freedom from religion. That is what separates belief from control. When we turn Christian values into public policy, when we pass laws based on only one group's interpretation of Scripture, we stop protecting religious freedom and we start enforcing it. And that is not what America was built for. True liberty means that you can live by your faith and your neighbor can live by theirs, even if it's different, even if you don't believe the same things. Another way purity culture shows up today is through misinformation, especially around science, sex ed, and gender identity. In many states, schools still don't teach medically accurate sex ed. Some leave out consent entirely. Others treat LGBTQ identities as a lifestyle choice or refuse to talk about them altogether. When I was in school, they taught us that using contraceptives was counterintuitive to God's plan, which is fine if that's your specific religious ideology, but they also taught us that AIDS was a punishment from God. And now, that same fear-based approach is being used to target trans and queer people, especially kids. Trans identities are being framed as dangerous or ideological, but that's not based in science. Every major medical organization in the United States, from the American Academy of Pediatrics to the Endocrine Society, supports gender-affirming care as safe, necessary, and often life-saving. Purity culture, which insists on a binary gender and sexual silence, has been weaponized into laws that can ban care, erase LGBTQ content, and threaten queer lives. But here's the truth. Gender-affirming care is supported by every major medical body in the United States. Being trans is not new. There have been trans people for as long as there have been people. It's not dangerous and it's not going away. And honestly, trans people are not the reason that our economy is struggling, that people are losing jobs, that the housing market is unstable, that we can't afford groceries. Trans people make up less than 1% of the population, and their existence has no real actual impact on your life. Purity culture teaches us that anyone outside the normal sexual script is a threat, is a deviant, is bad. Those people, they're just trying to live freely, just like you are. That fear is not about your protection. It's about controlling you. Let me say it again. There is nothing wrong with waiting to have sex. There is something wrong with telling people, especially vulnerable young women, that their value depends on it, that the sex that you have is the only correct and moral way to do it. It is immoral to never talk about consent, with skipping over queer people, with pretending that your pleasure doesn't matter, that we should endure. Over and over and over again, we see church leaders actively engaging in sexual abuse and it being hidden and slipped under the rug because kids don't know what is and isn't appropriate, and they aren't being taught the proper words to describe what's happening. And again, that shame around sex and sexuality keeps them silent and silently abused, sometimes for decades. Is that moral? Is that just? You can live by your values and still ask, is the way that I'm teaching this helping people, or is it hurting them? Is it hurting my kids? I know I'm getting fired up, and I want to acknowledge that right now we're in a place where everything feels divided, left and right, conservative, liberal, traditional, progressive, and that tension is fucking exhausting. But here's the thing, division is profitable. Keeping us at odds makes it easier for people in power to avoid accountability. It distracts us from asking better questions. It keeps us too busy fighting each other to notice who's actually making the rules. And that kind of polarization doesn't just hurt our conversations, it hurts our economy. It slows down legislation, it weakens public trust, and it makes it harder to invest in things like education, healthcare, housing, and real community safety. We don't have to agree on everything. But what we do have to do is stop letting fear and misinformation convince us that our neighbors are the enemy. Because when we're divided, we lose the ability to create meaningful change. If you believe in values like family, safety, dignity, and freedom, you have more in common with the trans people that you're being taught to fear than you think. And obviously, telling people that you're superior, that you know better, that they should be doing things exactly the way you are, that's not compassion, that's control, and it is antithetical to the teachings of Christ. And depending on how and where you say it, it can start to sound a lot like racism or classism or cultural erasure, and I know that you aren't those things. The consequences of purity culture can be dire. So there's this book, Pure, and in it, author Linda K. Klein interviews dozens of women who describe PTSD-like symptoms, panic attacks, and deep confusions about intimacy. They say things like, I couldn't enjoy sex even after marriage. I felt disgusted by my own body. I didn't know how to say no or to say yes. I thought my desires made me bad, made me sinful. I felt physically nauseated by my own arousal. These teachings, these purity culture teachings, aren't neutral. They have a cost. And also a literal, actual cost. We've talked a lot about purity culture as a set of beliefs, but we also need to talk about it as a business. Because purity culture doesn't just shape values, it sells them. There is an entire industry built around sexual shame and moral control. And like a lot of things in America, it's selling you something. Christian publishing made millions on books like I Kissed Dating Goodbye, which taught a generation that dating itself was dangerous. Purity rings and jewelry are sold to teens and church groups as symbols of virginity, often alongside expensive events and pledge ceremonies. Conferences and mega church events charge for access to speakers, workshops, and merch, all built around this idea of staying pure. Abstinence-only education programs are still funded with taxpayer dollars in many states, often using outdated or misleading material. When you realize that this messaging also drives product sales, conference tickets, political donations, and even educational policy, it gets harder to pretend that it's just about values. Because when purity becomes a brand, shame becomes a revenue stream. And before we go any further, I want to acknowledge something else. Yes, purity culture sells shame. But we also live in a world that profits in the opposite direction too. Porn, plastic surgery, diet culture, even social media algorithms. All of them make money off of women's body and sexuality in other ways. Where purity culture says cover up, this culture says you're still not enough unless you're hot, white, thin, and marketable. And it's not really about modesty or sex positivity. It's about control. And in both cases, the product being sold is your self-worth. So this isn't just about me calling out one system. It's about us noticing together all the ways that we're taught that our bodies and our beliefs don't fully belong to us. If this is hitting home, if you're realizing that purity culture has shaped how you think about sex, your body, or even your self-worth, I want you to hear this next part clearly. You are not broken. You were taught to be afraid by a system that actively profits on your shame. It wasn't your fault. You didn't choose it. It was given to you by people who may have very well meant well or who were afraid themselves. And a lot of the people who are still holding on to purity culture, they're a product of the system that they were raised in. It doesn't make them evil. It doesn't make you evil. It makes you human. It makes them human. And we all know these people. Maybe your mom taught you these things because she didn't know another way. Maybe the people who raised you believed that they were protecting you. Maybe you're just now starting to understand what being queer or trans is. Maybe you're even starting to realize that you might be part of those communities, and that feels big and scary. Regardless, you are your own person. You get to choose something different. You get to ask new questions. You get to learn. You get to unlearn. You can seek new communities. You get to become the person that you decide to be. You are allowed to reconnect with your body. You are allowed to ask questions about pleasure. You are allowed to learn about sex and sexuality from a shame-free perspective. You are allowed to set your own boundaries and explore your desires on your terms. You are allowed to create a sex life or a celibate life that you choose. And if you're raising kids or mentoring others or just trying to get through the day without the shame script playing in your head, you are doing the work of repair. And if you do believe in Christian ideals, I want to thank you for being here, because that work matters too. Because choosing to care for your body, to educate yourself in order to love others better and more openly and safety, to honor the sexuality that God has endowed us with, to treat yourself and others with dignity, those are acts of compassion. And compassion is what is at the heart of Jesus's message. You're not just breaking cycles, you're honoring the spirit of your faith. The last thing I want to talk about is what I call cringe creep. Cringe creep. Maybe you're sitting here watching this video and you're thinking, I'm not Christian, I'm not Catholic, I'm not super conservative. I just think talking about sex is gross and weird and embarrassing. And that is totally fair. Talking about sex can be weird and strange and embarrassing, especially if you've never been given the tools to do so in a way that is healthy, consensual, and open-minded. Now, do I think that we need to get in a habit of massively oversharing or telling anybody who will listen about the intimate details of our private life? Of course not. I talk about sex online for my job, and there's still stuff that I don't talk about online because it's private and it's for me and my partners. However, there is a difference between keeping things private, choosing to be modest, choosing to be thoughtful about the way that we speak about sex and intimacy, especially in mixed audiences, and shaming, guilting, or embarrassing other people for wanting to talk about sex. For some people, having the freedom to talk about sex and getting really excited about talking about sex is a way of taking ownership back. Do I think that you have to watch that content? No, of course not. And it's one of the reasons why I think it's really important to opt into and watch that kind of content consensually. But be careful if you find yourself shaming people, even your friends or family, for talking about sex, for bringing up sex. Because when we make those conversations cringy, when we make them unnatural, it again falls into that slippery slope of purity culture and keeping things shameful and quiet and undiscussed. And it can lead to all of those other negative consequences that I already talked about. If you're not a person who feels comfortable having conversations about sex and intimacy with your friends, that's okay. But I encourage you to educate yourself about resources, about books, about websites, about creators and places that you can go to and share with them, rather than saying, ew, gross, I can't believe you want to talk about that. Because what if your friend needs help? What if your friend needs some advice? What if your friend is in an unsafe situation? There are so many possibilities why someone might want to talk about sex, even if it feels unfamiliar. So just make sure that you're approaching it with an open mind and an open heart. But don't let anybody give you any shit either. Healing from purity culture isn't just personal. It's generational. Every time you challenge shame, you ask for consent, or you tell the truth about what happened to you, you are doing what someone before you didn't have the freedom to do. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching the whole thing. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to give me a like and a subscribe, and you can also hit the notification button if you want. I'm hoping to start making more long form content. I'm sure if you could tell, I got a teleprompter and it is changing the way that I make content, because I can write out all my thoughts beforehand and then put them on the screen, and then I can just say them. It's amazing. It saves so much time. A couple of other announcements before I leave you. Number one, my book is still available for pre-order, so you can go check that out wherever you want to get your books. I'd love to encourage you to use bookshop.org to support small local businesses in your area. Please also check out my new podcast, Sorry I Missed This, over on understood.org. I'm going to be at Frolicon this year, and your girl just got guested at Dragon Con. So I'm very, very excited about that. I've never been a guest before. So, we're moving up in the world. But anyway, if you like this video, please feel free to share it around, especially to somebody who you think might need to hear it. Please feel free to share it on your social medias. Don't forget to tag me though. I like knowing when people tag me and stuff. And yeah, that's all. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited about this video. Have a great day, everybody. Okay, bye.